continuing 50 key video games. This is the third part of this series, as you may call it. And I started reading a few games. I think I've been doing 3 games each book reading stream. I've been reading in chronological order. So the first stream was the early 70s, late 70s. And then I started the second stream with the few games from the early mid 80s. And the last game I talked about of that was Super Mario Bros. I want to start off with the mid to late 80s and early 90s. And I'm definitely skipping some games because I want you guys to check this book out. I don't want to spoil it all for you. And I mean, a ton of these games I've never even heard of, so I kind of want to read the juicy ones, you know, like the bangers. So, what we are gonna go with, as far as this stream, part 3 of 50 key video games, The Legend of Zelda. Let's start with that from 1986. This is on page 153. So let's take a look at 153. All right. So The Legend of Zelda. So this one is about 4 pages long. Maybe like 5, but and there's like 4 bullet points. I'm going to read the introduction to The Legend of Zelda, and let's get some history. And let's begin. In an interview for the release of The Legend of Zelda Sound and Drama music album from 1994, Shigeru Miyamoto, game designer and director of Nintendo, described his game with a simple premise, quote, "An everyday boy gets drawn into a series of incredible events and grows to become a hero," end quote. Such a common, even cliched, hero's journey tale description is a rather humble one given the massive critical and commercial success of Nintendo's 1986 game, The Legend of Zelda. The title would eventually sell more than 6.5 million copies and grow into a series of 18 games in a global multimedia franchise. In 2016, the Strong Museum of Play inducted The Legend of Zelda into their World Video Game Hall of Fame, citing its then novel combination of story, exploration, puzzles, and mechanics that would serve as inspiration for many games to come. At the time of writing, more Zelda games are in development as the series is firmly established as a Nintendo flagship title. In this chapter, italicized Zelda and The Legend of Zelda are interchangeable terms. Alright, so that was the intro. The first bullet point, as we call it, is the adventure begins. The Legend of Zelda begins with a prologue detailed in the game's instruction manual. Princess Zelda has hidden 8 pieces of the mythical Triforce of Wisdom throughout the land of Hyrule, hoping to keep it away from the game's chief antagonist, Ganon. Ganon seeks world domination by obtaining all of the pieces of the Triforce, which would bestow upon him unparalleled abilities. Having already stolen the Triforce of Power, Ganon imprisons Princess Zelda. Her nursemaid, Impa, is sent to find someone courageous enough to destroy Ganon. Impa finds that person in a boy named Link, and the story begins. The player, as Link, must explore the land of Hyrule to acquire the pieces of the Triforce of Wisdom in order to find and defeat Ganon. Through a landscape of mountains, caves, deserts, and other, mostly natural topography, players battle enemies, meet friendly characters, discover treasure, and solve puzzles. Their major available actions thus include moving about the 2-dimensional map in a top-down perspective, occasionally moving objects, and attacking enemies with various acquired weapons. The 3 central characters, Link, Zelda, and Ganon, persist throughout the franchise, their roles changing very little from their original incarnations in the 1986 title. Even Impa is a frequently recurring side character who always comes to Zelda's aid. In interviews, Miyamoto and his team credit varied sources as loose inspiration for these characters. Link's youthful elfin androgyny in homage to Peter Pan, Zelda from Zelda Fitzgerald, F. Scott Fitzgerald's wife, and Ganon's pig-like appearance to Cho Hawkeye a literally pig-headed character from a 16th century Chinese novel, Ci Yu Ji. Other aspects of the game would also continue throughout the series. For instance, the Triforce has become part of the essential iconography of the game. Along with characters and objects, the origins of many narrative features, gameplay elements, art, and music in later games can be traced back to The Legend of Zelda. On the whole, Miyamoto cites adventure-based films that were popular at the time, specifically the Indiana Jones franchise, as the inspiration for developing The Legend of Zelda. Something about the treasure-hunting epic adventure was yet to be captured on game consoles, where the player could become the adventurer. But Zelda was not the first action-adventure video game to hit global markets. Predecessors include Atari's Adventure from 1979, Superman from 1979 as well, and yes, even a video game version of Raiders of the Lost Ark from 1982. At their core, these games were similar to The Legend of Zelda. Control a character to explore a world and defeat evil. However, Nintendo's relative success with Zelda points to a kind of magic synergy of factors that propelled the game to popularity and admiration worldwide, some of which could be attributed to game design, some to Nintendo's technology, and some to marketing decisions. A powerful Triforce indeed. Next bullet point: technology and marketing. Nintendo shipped The Legend of Zelda as a flagship title for their Family Computer Disk System, a peripheral upgrade for the original Family Computer, more commonly known as the Famicom and later redesigned as the Nintendo Entertainment System, or NES in Western markets. The Famicom was already a popularly selling system in Japan, but the introduction of the disk system, which utilized relatively inexpensive floppy disks compared to cartridges, created more buzz around the console. The FDS offered increased sound channels, storage capacity, and the ability to rewrite disk with new game data. As an FDS launch title, The Legend of Zelda was the very first console game to allow the player to save their game progress, an innovation that greatly expanded gameplay horizons. Designers could introduce greater levels of difficulty and complexity in games now that players had a safety net in case of failure. On this measure alone, The Legend of Zelda felt like a big and expansive game. If players could pick up where they left off, they can spend more time invested in the world and the progress through it. This technological feature thus enabled a feeling of epic adventure in a way that prior games could not. It also set it apart from its immediate Nintendo predecessor, Super Mario Bros. of 1985, which was modeled more closely on its arcade origins. A Mario game offered relatively accessible, discrete level-based challenges that allowed for racking up points and achieving high scores. The Legend of Zelda, on the other hand, drew more inspiration from the feeling of an epic adventure rather than from a set of fun interactive mechanics. Miyamoto credited his experiences as a child exploring nature around his home in Kyoto, Japan, as his inspiration, pointing to a particular sense of wonder and discovery that he wanted to capture. Miyamoto aimed to bring that explorative effect to Zelda, stating that he, quote, wanted to create a game where the player could experience the feeling of exploration as he travels about the world, becoming familiar with the history of the land and the natural world they inhabit, close quote. Of course, a totally unbounded game could engender frustration and confusion in players, so balancing traditional elements of goal-oriented gameplay and player guidance was a key factor in the design process. In Zelda's early stages, game testers complained about its high level of difficulty. Miyamoto responded by taking Link's sword away, having the player start off with no weapon at all, which forces him to begin the game in exploration mode. Where is the weapon I need to defeat these monsters? It's with the old man in a cave, featuring the now iconic line in English translation, "It's dangerous to go alone, take this." The decision to have players search for Link's sword at the very beginning meant that Link was likely to die at least once before the player realized what to do, presumably leading to even greater frustration than the playtesters had initially noted. but Miyamoto banked on something else, that players might go beyond the game itself to try to figure things out. He expressed the hope that players would seek out each other to form a community around playing Zelda and discovering its secrets. He'd seen it in communities that had developed around role-playing games and was thus inspired to try to proactively foster these conversations through the complexities of Nintendo's new, expansive game. Another strategy for developing the world of Zelda was to make significant use of the instruction manual that came with the game, as well as including a map. This essentially expanded the world of the game beyond the screen, a deliberate goal of the team who sought to, quote, reinforce the feeling of the game's epic setting. After the title screen, an opening crawl displaying numerous and diverse items and icons in the game scrolls until Link appears, holding up a sign that says, "Please look up the manual for details." The manual was full of extra material, such as story lore, character information, and helpful hints for solving puzzles. The difficulty of the game, alongside this title screen directive, encouraged players not only to read the manual, but also to buy a hard copy of the game rather than acquiring it at an FDS disc rewriting kiosk. Placing greater value on material aspects, rather than just the virtual elements, helped plant the seed of the game's lasting legacy. As one nostalgic gamer put it, quote, "This was a ridiculously premium product, a Fabergé egg in a black sleeve, and as a kid holding both the gold box and the gold cartridge, you felt like you just unearthed a treasure." Close quote. Alright, so the next bullet point is the sound of adventure. And I'm not going to read that one. I'm going to let you guys... I don't want to spoil this book too much, guys. This is like a select reading. So, that was The Legend of Zelda. I'm going to skip SimCity from 1989, Sid Meier's Civilization from 1991, and I'm going to go to Mortal Kombat 1992. Let's read about Mortal Kombat history, guys. This is on page 166. I can barely read it. Mortal Kombat. Alright, here we go. Page 166. Mortal Kombat from 1992. Introduction. Upon its premiere in October 1992, Midway's Mortal Kombat became a strong competitor in the coin-op market for fighting games, an American upstart, rivaling its primary source of generic inspiration, Capcom's Street Fighter II: The World Warrior. Given East Asia's popular, albeit reductive, association with martial artistry, the highest quality fighting games have often been credited to Japanese studios like Capcom, although Street Fighter II's largely bloodless combat opened the door for North American rivals like Midway to use explicit gore as an eye-catching gimmick. The respective battle between these games, along with the many imitators they spawned, helped transform fighting games from a relatively minor phenomenon into one of the most popular genres in 1990s gaming, bringing fresh blood to North American arcades and an emerging generation of 16-bit home consoles. Building on earlier genre conventions, e.g. in a round health meters, multi-round matches, two-player competitive play, Street Fighter II had added new dimensions of gameplay strategy. A full roster of playable characters, each with their own visual design, special moves, simple combos, and distinct sets of strengths and weaknesses, and thereby created a template that most other fighting games would follow. The distinctive features that Mortal Kombat innovated, however, proved as controversial as they were profitable, especially once parents and media watchdog groups became increasingly alarmed about video game violence entering the domestic sphere. Next bullet point, the origins of Mortal Kombat. Let's read that. By 1988, three Chicago-based amusement firms, Midway, Bally, and Williams Industries, had merged into a single corporation, with Midway as the brand name of their successful arcade division. Programmer Ed Boon and artist John Tobias originally pitched Mortal Kombat as a fighting game that would digitize martial arts star Jean-Claude Van Damme via pixelation. a stop motion technique in which photographic stills of live actors are edited together to create the illusion of movement. As a licensed tie-in with the film Universal Soldier from 1992. Although the Universal Soldier deal ultimately fell through, Boone and Tobias, plus background artist John Vogel and composer sound designer Dan Forden, decided to carry on without Van Damme's involvement, instead filming local martial artists for rendering as photorealistic character sprites who would battle within hand-drawn background arenas. Boasting greater realism than hand-drawn sprites, Midway had already used pixelated actors for the characters in its platform shooter game Narc from 1988. It would successfully combine this more cinematic aesthetic with cross-promotional development deals for the rail shooter Terminator 2, Judgment Day, and the basketball game NBA Jam, especially after Mortal Kombat's success helped prove pixelation's overall viability as a marker of product differentiation. Indeed, unlike Street Fighter II's colorful, anime-inspired sprites, which make Capcom's game a cartoonish tournament of fights between various national cultural stereotypes from around the world, Mortal Kombat's photorealism proved one of its most immediately striking features, especially when combined with the gouts of animated blood that spill from the combatants during each match. Without a direct movie tie-in for Mortal Kombat's original story, Tobias drew narrative inspiration from films about mysterious and deadly martial arts tournaments, such as Bruce Lee's Enter the Dragon and the Van Damme vehicle Bloodsport, plus elements of supernatural magic drawn from more fantastical films like Zoo, Warriors from the Magic Mountain, Hong Kong cinema baby, and Big Trouble in Little China. Whereas early fighting games often depicted martial arts as simply a form of competitive sport, loose narrative justification about good heroes versus evil bosses had become a generic convention by the late 1980s. Former comic book artist Tobias uses some cinematic inspirations to flesh out Mortal Kombat with far more backstory than seen in any previous fighting game. Told via the game's Attract mode and a mail-order comic book, Mortal Kombat is a shadowy martial arts tournament that was once held by the legendary Shaolin Temple, but which has since been commandeered by an evil sorcerer Shang Tsung, with the help of a monstrous four-armed demigod named Goro. Each of the 7 playable characters also has specific motivations for participating in the tournament, but they must ultimately fight their way up to the 2 boss characters to prevent Shang Tsung from gaining immortality by continuing to harvest fallen combatant souls. While some of these characters, such as Liu Kang and Johnny Cage as Bruce Lee and Jean-Claude Van Damme analogs, originated as allusions to Tobias's filmic influences, their individual narratives will become increasingly complex as sequel games developed a dense cosmology of alternate dimensions, rival deities, overlapping timelines, and plenty of other lore. Already dripping in Orientalist texture, Mortal Kombat's diegesis gained an even darker and more mysterious ambience through Midway's deliberate inclusion of various Easter eggs, like an unlockable fight against the hidden character Reptile, whose existence arcade gamers are largely spread via word of mouth, leading to further rumors and speculation about what other hidden features might be encoded in the game. Indeed, Mortal Kombat's creative team would increasingly seed Easter eggs and running jokes into the series, whether as non-existent features teased in the game's audit menu, accessible only to arcade operators, it says, or by incorporating the ideas developed by fans' overactive imaginations into new features present in later games. Mortal Kombat's most notorious hidden feature, however, was the ability for a match's winning player to perform a fatality upon their defeated opponent as a bloody coup de grace. Among the most emblematic fatalities were Sub-Zero's extraction of his opponent's head and spinal column, and Kano's extraction of his opponent's still beating heart, both of which were highlighted during the high-profile concern over video game violence that would erupt in fall 1993. Although Midway did not publicize how to perform these so-called finishing moves, their existence circulated as an open secret, becoming a major part of the game's draw. While successfully executing fatality moves is not a prerequisite For winning Mortal Kombat, the novelty value of the game's gore meant that winning players were socially expected to thrill arcade spectators with such grand guignol spectacles of death. Spectacles of death. I don't know what that word means. In effect, then a player can technically win a match but still feel a sense of failure, and thus a strong desire to redeem themselves by playing again, by not performing fatalities when prompted by the prominent message, finish him or her. The next bullet point is video game violence and the birth of the ESRB. I'm going to skip that one. I don't want to read that one. Alright, well that was the only bullet point. But that's it for Mortal Kombat, guys. Let's read one more game from 50 Key Video Games. This is the third game I want to talk about. So, the next game is actually Doom from 1993. This is next on the list. Let's talk about Doom. History of Doom, guys. Page 69. Nice. Alright, let's talk about Doom. Doom history, guys. In 1992, ID Software completed and published Wolfenstein 3D, a groundbreaking first-person shooter, FPS, game that is today often referred to as the grandfather of its genre. The American company's next major project would be Doom, an even more ambitious FPS. The success of Wolfenstein 3D meant that Doom had a lot to live up to, but the developers, 5 young men, were unfazed by expectations. In January of 1993, they issued a press release heralding the release of the game later that year. With characteristic bravado, they claimed that Doom would represent a technical revolution in PC gaming that would make Wolfenstein 3D look primitive by comparison. Doom, moreover, would be, quote, the first game to really exploit the power of LANs and modems to their full potential. Finally, the developers promised to make Doom an open game and allowing players to, quote, easily write and share, end quote, their own modifications to the software. Impressively, they delivered on all these counts. Very cool. Alright, first bullet point. Presentation and gameplay. To the modern eye, Doom looks like a generic first-person shooter. But it only seems generic because of its deep and enduring influences on the genre. The player navigates the game world from a first-person perspective, with the currently equipped weapon projecting into that world as though the player were actually holding it. The player is represented by an animated portrait of a tough-looking man, the nameless Doom Marine. This portrait appears in the center of the status bar at the bottom of the screen, which informs the player of their current health and weapon loadout. Doom's backstory, which takes inspiration from 1980s action horror films like Aliens and Evil Dead 2, is tongue-in-cheek and not very important. The player is a space marine stationed on Mars as security for the Union Aerospace Corporation, UAC. The military uses the UAC's facilities to experiment with interdimensional space travel. This dangerous experimentation eventually results in the opening of a portal to hell, which evil demons use to attack humanity. At the start of the game, the player character finds himself at an overrun military compound and must fight his way out. There was a little more detail in the game's manual, but all the player needs to know is that they are supposed to clear the levels by killing the demons, which range from possessed humans through humanoid imps to hulking cybernetic monstrosities. The manual's description of a common enemy, the generic demon, should help convey the somehow both terrifying and silly nature of these enemies. Quote, sorta like a shaved gorilla except with horns, a big head, lots of teeth, and harder to kill. Don't get too close or they'll rip your fraggin' head off, end quote. The ultimate boss of the game is the Spider Mastermind, an arachnoid terror consisting of an enormous brain with the face, resting on a 4-legged metallic exoskeleton with an incorporated chain gun on the front. A typical level in Doom features scores of demons, but the player has access to enough firepower to even the odds. Chainsaw, pistol, shotgun, chain gun, rocket launcher, plasma rifle, and the BFG, the big fucking gun. Sorry, this is for kids only stream. Whoops. The BFG 9000, an especially powerful plasma rifle. These weapons are scattered around the sprawling levels, which abstract designs blend gothic science fiction with organic surrealism in the spirit of H.R. Geiger. Of course, the shooting-based gameplay is Doom's main attraction. It is unrelentingly fast and pulse-poundingly frantic. The player character can move at superhuman speed while shooting continuously. While weapons can run out of ammunition, they never need reloading and can be switched in the blink of an eye. The enemies, though deadly, are slower than the player and have at most a couple of different types of attack at their disposal. Some of these attacks are projectiles that can be avoided. For example, the imp hurls fireballs in a straight line toward the player, which the player should dodge by moving sideways, strafing out of the way. Other monsters rush down the player to connect a biting attack. They can be dealt with by running backward while shooting. The real havoc begins when multiple monsters of different kinds attack the player simultaneously. Whenever that happens, the player should focus on blasting the most dangerous foes while dashing around to avoid incoming attacks. Skilled players can make this deadly dance look almost graceful. Aside from engaging in combat, the player will spend time navigating the levels, many of which frustrate progress with hidden key cards. Alright, let's do the next bullet point, which is called Impact. To get a sense of Doom's impact, consider that for years after its release, the term Doom clone was used to designate any entry into the FPS genre. Much of this influence was doubtless due to Doom's distribution model, which offered the first of the original game's 3 chapters as free shareware. While the full version of Doom sold over 1 million copies, the shareware version achieved a much larger install base, likely over 10 million. What exactly did Doom bring to subsequent generations of FPS games? Certainly a conviction that satisfying gunplay and violent spectacle were enough to carry a game, and perhaps even a genre. Story would eventually come into focus with games like Half-Life from 1998, which had a slower pace and more deliberate shooting than Doom. Today, these two games are often considered the respective forebears of two distinct styles of FPS gameplay. Doom's focus on speed and dynamic gunplay defines movement-based shooters like Titanfall 2 and Unreal Tournament, as well as the 2016 reboot of Doom, whereas Half-Life inspired slower shooters like Call of Duty Black Ops. In addition, Doom provided the FPS genre with much of its semantic repository: cheesy movie tropes, generic alien enemies, tough guy protagonists, and weapon archetypes, such as the iconic rocket launcher. And being arguably the most recognizable and controversial first-person shooter ever made, Doom also deeply influenced modern gaming culture. I will touch on 3 areas: multiplayer, the PC gaming modding scene, and the cultural discourse surrounding violent video games. I will never forget the day in the summer of 1996 when I entered my first local Doom multiplayer tournament, or rather the day I entered the hall in which the tournament took place. I had never seen anything like it. Dozens of bulky beige desktop PCs were lined up on long wooden desks. About 30 participants, most of them teenage males, were playing, chatting, laughing, and generally having a good time. My best friend and I, both 9 years old at the time, arrived at the scene with what we thought was well-earned confidence. After all, we had practiced on Doom's challenging single-player campaign for months, but competitive multiplayer was a different beast. We could not believe the speed and accuracy of our would-be opponents. After watching the action for just a few minutes, we understood that all that was there for us was abject humiliation and slinked home. For me and for many players in the mid-1990s, Doom's multiplayer was something new and special. Just the idea of a friendly shootout in a virtual 3D environment was exciting. To be sure, Doom was not the first game to offer networked FPS multiplayer. That honor goes to 1973's Maze War, but Doom popularized it and put it online. Doom offered 2 multiplayer modes, each available for 2 to 4 players. Cooperative gameplay allowed players to take on the game's monster-infested levels together. The second mode had players shoot at each other instead, earning a frag with each successful kill. Designer and programmer John Romero coined the term deathmatch for this mode. a label that still shows up in modern FPS games. About Doom's multiplayer, the developer's original press release had made the bold prediction that it would become, quote, the #1 cause of decreased productivity in business around the world. They may have actually been right about that. In 1994, Computer Gaming World reported that Intel had banned Doom from the work environment. This happened, quote, after several Intel subnets were rendered inoperable during lunch hour, as employees raced to get in a game of multiplayer Doom Deathmatch. Other businesses and universities were going to ban the game because it stole employees' time and hogged computer networks. That's pretty funny. Also buttressed by the developing online infrastructure was Doom's influence on the PC modding scene. As promised by the developers, the game made its data, notably level design, sprites, and sound effects, accessible and modifiable to players in so-called WAD files, short for Where's All the Data. Players could then mix and match these elements as they pleased, creating new levels or even completely new games based on Doom's software engine. The internet allowed for the widespread sharing of these creations, which were also distributed commercially on CD collections. Very cool. The last bullet point is violence, and I'm going to skip that one for now. Well, there you go, guys. This is part 3 of 50 Key Video Games. Part 1 I read 3, part 2 I read 3, and today I read 3. And that was from the 80s and 90s. So, sneak peek. Let's see. Wing Commander 3, Heart of the Tiger from 1994. Diablo from 96. The Elder Scrolls 2, Daggerfall from 96. Resident Evil from 96. Super Mario 64 from 96. Final Fantasy 7 from 1997. Hell, I might go with Resident Evil, Super Mario 64, and Final Fantasy 7. I'm going to skip those others, right? Because I'm not a hater. I just don't know what those games are about. I'm not interested. Alright. Well, be on the lookout for part 4, guys. Some video game history for y'all. So,